Hey everyone, my name is George. I am the club president of the University of Guelph Debate Club. If you haven't seen our content yet, well, this is a great place to start. What this podcast is going to be about is being critical of the University of Guelph, Guelph itself, or ideas that we have in society. I'm joined with James Dixon and Robbie Walker today. How you doing?
Good.
Okay.
How would you explain yourself to someone who hasn't met you, having an element of something new to someone who has met you?
Wow.
Oh, that's a good question.
What a question. My name is James Dixon, is probably how I would start. Maybe not to somebody who already knows me, because hopefully they would know that. Well, I'm Justin's older brother, also part of the debate club. And currently I am a student at Wilfrid Laurier University, specifically in Martin Luther University College in the Christian Studies and Global Citizenship program. I went back to school to kind of broaden my horizons when kind of understanding Christianity and theology. The specific interest that I have is in that field, and that is what I'm studying currently. I'm a public speaker, and I facilitate and co-host different workshops specifically for Catholic teachers in Ontario. I went to a Catholic elementary school and high school, and there's a little bit of a gap when it comes to Christianity and Catholicism specifically, and also being able to care for students who are part of the 2SLGBTQIA plus community. That's probably the gap in which I'm trying to fill with my work in my academia. That's probably how I would describe myself kind of broadly. As for something that people don't know, I'm an outdoorsy kind of person. I appreciate art. This one got me into Star Trek.
It's true.
I was never a sci-fi person. So people who know me and maybe haven't spoken to me for a while might be a little bit surprised that I'm into sci-fi now.
When was the first time you didn't feel like how you were assigned at birth?
This is probably an important part of my identity that I actually didn't say in my introduction. I'm a transgender man, so I was assigned female at birth. You phrased it exactly correctly. And I came out and transitioned when I was in high school. I think that, there's a part of your early childhood growing up where there's a bit of androgyny. It's just like, I'll just wear whatever my mom puts me in, whatever that is. I think once kids start differentiating and kind of being told the difference, like, at least for me, I can imagine, it might have been before, but around 5 years old, especially like going to like kindergarten and being around other kids, boys go in this line, girls go in that line. I didn't really understand what that meant, but I knew that, I didn't really want to be put in dresses. Like, that was just not something I was super interested in. I can't get my, I can't go rolling around in the grass if I've got nice clothes on. So there's just that kind of like prohibitive, I don't want to be in this role. I'm not that much older than you, but you are still the age of my younger brother. And so I'm technically like the oldest of the Gen Z, like the oldest year possible. So the era that I grew up in wasn't heavily, social media or an internet thing. And so it's not like the amount of coverage and language that we have now. And so I didn't have any like words for it, but I described myself as a tomboy for a lot of it. Like the way that I would dress, I'd try to be androgynous as possible. And that was kind of happening like pre-puberty is when that really started kicking in of, I just want to be one of the boys. I had a lot of my closest friends were girls, and there's not anything wrong with being a girl, but there was just something about not only the aesthetic of it, but also just the personality aspect. There's also just this deep, how would I describe it? Like spiritual almost aspect to it. It was like there's this essence in me that I can't change. I don't have language for to fully describe what it is, but I can't go away from it. I keep getting drawn to it. It's continued to happen my entire life, but it really did start quite early on, like in my childhood. When puberty started, I kind of had to, it was just like, okay, you're a woman now. I was like, okay, I guess I'll try. And that's when a lot of like mental and emotional problems started happening for me until I was able to be like, until I got the language for it again.
So what about high school led you to publicly come out?
Okay. as I kind of got deeper into the pit of depression, I was able to find the language. I was able to, like, there was a lot of people at the time kind of trans people making videos like about their transition, about like the like queer history, about all this stuff. And I was just like, well, I'm just a great ally, and this is, this is interesting to me, but I could never be this. And I had a lot of curiosity, like, how did they figure it out? They were allowed to do it, but there was still this block of like, I'm not allowed to be that, because they must have had like a doctor tell them, oh, you're a boy now, here you go. It was one of those things where it was like for somebody else and not for me. But I just kind of realized that there was kind of this shame thing of like shutting this off, because what do you mean I'm like failing at this societal role that I'm being put at? Like it didn't feel good to me. It was one of those like shameful things as well, mostly because I guess, the best language that I had for, even just like being gay were slurs and things like that. I mean, I had gay uncles and I loved them, but that never really fully resonated with me. And then it was like I was able to find people who had very similar experiences to me just growing up, of being more of a tomboy, of wanting to dress, different ways than what their moms wanted to put them in. And I had many years of the thoughts kind of bubbling up, and I was just like, no, put that back down. Put that back in the closet deep down, kind of like in my own emotional being, like, nah, I'm not ready for that yet. But I never fully locked that door, I think. It was something that started coming up in my dreams a lot. Even a school project, I remember, like, where are you going to see yourself in 20 years? And I saw myself as a man first, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense, push that away, because that's not what it's supposed to be. But it just kept on being this reoccurring thing. It was in grade 10 where I was really fully to figure it out. I remember I was away on a trip. I just remember kind of being myself in a room that I was staying at, and being just like, there is something wrong with how I'm conducting myself, and if I don't fix it, there's more severe mental health consequences that'll happen. And then I was finally able to once I got to that moment of like, okay, there is a problem I need to fix, it just kind of came to me of like, oh my gosh, I'm like those people who I've heard the stories of. And, I need to allow myself to admit that and to see if that fits for me. So, I kind of made online personas where I try out different, male names and see how those fit, and kind of construct to this, like, would this work for me type of thing. It took a long time to even just like figure out internally, and I would just kind of go through the motions of being like in high school at the time. Nobody really knew about it. And then I was like, yeah, no, this is totally what it is. In research, there's a book called LGBTQ Clients in Therapy by Dr. Joe Court, and he finds that generally there are 3 stages of like coming out. You come out to yourself, to your friends, and then to your family. And so I was able to come out to myself, and I was like, okay, no, this, when you realize something and it puts everything in the past back into perspective, it was like, oh, no, this totally all makes sense. But I wasn't able to figure that out until obviously I had the language and the blueprint for that. And then I talked to my friends about it, and they're just like, oh, finally, you got it. I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, we've known for at least like a year or 2. I was like, how? And they're like, there's so many things that you talked about. You talked about like, seeing yourself as a man, being a boy when you dreamt. And I was like, oh. But I appreciate that they were able to kind of give me space to figure it out and still be kind of supportive in our friendship life. And then I was really nervous because I didn't know how they would react, but I came out to my family. They are lovely. It took them a little while to, figure it out, but they're fantastic allies, and I deeply appreciate all that they've like done for me and the family. And so all of that together, it was like, okay, I have my friends to support me, I have my family to support me. I'm in this Catholic high school with really rigid gender roles, and that's going to be a bit more of a challenge, but I knew that I had to try, and I wanted to try, and because of that support, I was given the confidence to try, and that's what got me there, to come out in high school, and it went well. It was very surprising, but it worked, and I've rolled with it ever since.
Robbie, how would you describe yourself to someone who doesn't know you, but to someone who does know you would learn something new?
My name is Robert William Walker. My friends call me Robbie. Go ahead. So even there, most people who know me well don't know that my middle name is William, so I'm being a little bit cheeky. Okay, but how would I describe myself? I am a PhD candidate in the Toronto School of Theology based at Trinity College. I am a gay, gender not, mostly man. Gender not meaning I am kind of like astronaut, right? Instead of exploring the stars, I'm exploring my gender. I love Star Trek. I love talking about theology and human sexuality. I've been a writer and a reader since being a wee one, and so all of those are special interests. Oh, I also live with cerebral palsy. I am this situation, gesturing to myself. What that is a neurological disorder that usually affects motor control, and it's sort of like a whole bunch of other things in life. You can have the diagnosis or the name for it, and then the actual experience per person is always different. So when I'm walking down the street, it's like, there's another human with CP, because there are just recognizable ways of moving. For me, I can walk. I usually use a cane or a beautiful human for stability in public. This is my partner, James. We've been together for 5 years. That's usually how I would describe myself.
When was the first time you realized you were gay?
Oh, goodness. So here I am in 5th grade. I have a crush on this redheaded girl who's a swimmer, and I thought she was lovely. And then there was this other boy, also a swimmer, in my class, and it really felt to me, I don't know how it felt to him, like, okay, she's going to choose one of us. Which one is it going to be? And it was him. And the way I remember it, we were after gym class. I remember having a conversation with this other guy in my class. And the way I remember and received the conversation, he gloated. She chose me. And I sat there for many, many minutes. And I was like, okay, but what does he have that I don't? And there was, I don't know what it was. There was just this, there was a physical sensation. It was almost like something went snap in my head. And I went, oh my God, I have a crush on Swimmer Boy. And there was this immediate cascade of abject terror that sort of descended on my thinking process, because even at that age, like I knew growing up, fundamentalist, in a fundamentalist household, Protestant, hanging out in capital E evangelical churches, which tend to be conservative but socially engaged Christians. And, so this is not going to be good. And so there was just this absolute terror. And so, yeah, that day, it was like I felt so broken. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know what to call it. But that was the first time that I knew I was gay. And then there's the whole journey about, do I take on that name? What do I resist? Is this a disease? Is this an evil spirit? Like all of these things were part of the language when I grew up, The reason you're gay is because you have a dysfunctional relationship with the same-sex parent, or it's exacerbated by an evil spirit, or you've been abused as a child, especially sexually, or, all of these stereotypes that have basically been thoroughly disproven by mainstream research, and yet none of that was available. And so here I am. I don't even have the name for it, but I know I like other boys, being in the 5th grade and being absolutely terrified that it says something terrible about me as a human, that this is part of my consciousness. But being queer is a good. And being straight is a good in itself. There's all kinds of malfunctions, but the fact that those things exist, I think they're just goods. If someone ends up at A, fantastic. Your path could be a complete mess, but hey, you got to A, cool. You got to B, you got to C, you got to D. So my version of queer, I got there. This is a good. I don't care whether it's genetic, whether I was damaged and compensated, whether it was something that it was just easier for me to assimilate a different way of doing masculinity. I do not care because I got to the good of being an out queer human. I do not think that my CP is a good, but I think my queerness is a good. And so needing to think through that distinction and how do I explain that to people who ask if they do is an important piece of my story. But yeah, to answer your question in one sentence, yeah, absolutely my experience of CP directly affected how I dealt with coming out. Absolutely.
How did your family perceive you coming out?
It's funny because I've had a lot of time to forgive. So when I tell these stories, there's not a lot of pain attached because I've let it go. But I remember one conversation with my mother who was quite angry with me. So my mother is a Pentecostal Christian who just realized in the last few years that she's an evangelical. What I mean by that is, in really basic terms, if you encounter someone who's a fundamentalist in an academic way, they're usually culturally isolationists, so they think that the world somehow will contaminate them. And also, it's just, I'm just reading the sacred text the way it is. Mm-hmm. Like, don't argue with me, argue with the Bible, argue with God, okay? Evangelicals tend to realize that they're interpreting the Bible. And they may still be quite conservative politically and theologically, but they also don't automatically assume that surrounding culture is going to contaminate because God made and loves the world. The Holy Spirit is working everywhere. And so evangelicals can encounter culture and sort of take time to discern as opposed to, ooh, the devil's going to get us. Okay? So my mom just recently realized she's an evangelical. But at the time, she was a fundamentalist. And she says to me, what you're experiencing is just lust of the flesh. And I cannot believe you wanted to be a pastor knowing that that was part of your life. And I said, Mom, I still want to be a pastor. And she takes a deep breath and she says, I don't understand that. Then I talked to her very briefly. I said, because we used to watch TV together and she would go, oh, he's a good looking man, you know, when she sees someone she likes. And I said, but when that happens to you, what's going on for you emotionally? Like, what are you responding to? And she goes, well, you know, I think he's good looking, but there's this, you know, I want to get to know him. There's a, you know, come here, play in my sandbox sort of tone she was using. And I said, that is exactly when I'm healthy, responding in a healthy way. That's exactly what happens when I see an attractive man. And she goes, oh, I'm going to have to think about that too. My former stepfather, Christmas morning, I almost didn't get to go and see my family the same year that I came out because we're sitting in the driveway of my house and he's yelling at me about homosexuality is vile. And I said, no, you don't understand. The Bible doesn't talk about anything that I'm experiencing. He goes, well, then you tell me in 2 sentences what the Bible teaches. And I said, I can't. It took me a decade to research and I could do it now. But at the time, I'm like sitting there getting yelled at by the man that I love, right? And we did calm down. And I did get to see my family. But the thing that I always remember is that he said to me, you mustn't talk to any of your siblings about faith, because your views on sexuality are so wrong that anything else that comes out of your mouth could be a lie. So the hostility, your mom doesn't sleep very well anymore because it's your fault. Like, no, Papa. This family had all kinds of issues, but it's interesting that research says, sort of like in the coming out process, when someone starts to differentiate, find out who they are, make decisions about, okay, this is how I want to live my life. If you're in an unhealthy system, the system will try to immediately smack you down back to homeostasis, right? It's no, we want it calm, we want it regular. So it's your fault, oh differentiating one. The one that sticks out, the sore thumb is the problem? No. 90% of the time, the sore thumb in a given situation isn't the root of the problem. But I had to take on, right, for a while, and then I refused because I was like, good therapy teaches you good things. So I was like, nah, that's not my stuff. So I would say, no, I'm just being me the best way I know how.
They consider also disabilities. I know Christianity has brewed that as some sort of a flaw.
Like someone could, do something stupid. You're not supposed to jump off this particular cliff. There's signs everywhere, and they break their neck and become paraplegic or something. Those sorts of stories happen. But like, those are the consequences. That's where they stop, right? You can't blame the person for everything after that. About here, they need to adjust to their new situation. By the way, if you consider yourself able-bodied, there will be a point in your life where you are not able-bodied. So like, think that through, because there's this thing called getting old, right? That like, we build stairs, thinking that nobody gets old and everybody will be healthy to use the stairs. It doesn't work that way. So I don't think that this is me. There are Christians and there are definitely people who disagree. I do not think that disablement and impairment are aligned with the love of God. I think that God would prefer that disablement and impairment, involuntary suffering of all kinds, should cease to exist. And I think that, for me, is one of the Pentecostal distinctives, I think, that I still carry with me. But I am not at fault for living with CP. I am doing the best that I can as I am. So some people get healed, and I think that's lovely, and some people don't. But even if you don't experience the immediate kind of cure or healing that you want, it doesn't prevent God, love, healthy community from expressing itself through a disabled or impaired body. And so I really think that we ought to stop this nonsense about you're disabled but deserving, you're disabled and non-deserving, you're poor and deserving, you're poor and not deserving. Just stop that deserving versus not deserving shit and teach people that no matter their capacity, their existence is a good, and they can express love and goodness and all of the things that we celebrate and we should celebrate as a society and a culture. All of those things are available to any and all disabled people, as long as the society also commits to being loving and just. And there's the piece where we get stuck. But it's not the disabled person's fault for being disabled. Like, just stop that shit. It doesn't work.
So what compelled you to do a 75-minute presentation in the equity and social justice class?
After I came out as transgender, when I was in grade 11, the reception was great, but still a lot of people didn't quite know like exactly what it was. For a lot of people, I was like the first person that they met. I was in the same classroom for two of my classes. One of them was religion, and the other one was a social equity course. And the teacher of both is a wonderful person. Her name is Yvonne Runstedler. As a culminating project in the equity course, people were doing like 10-minute presentations on kind of any kind of social justice topic. There was like, you know, it was a bit broad of whatever you wanted to do. And I had always really liked public speaking. I don't know if it was still a thing afterwards, but you kind of do speeches in grade 6, 7, and 8. Did you guys do that? Yeah. And I loved that. I really wanted to do something both as a reflection of the skills that I learned in the course, but also something personal to me and something that I kind of wanted to give like the community as well, to kind of like bring people in on my life and this, you know, kind of broad topic. You know, trans people and queer people in general are not monoliths. And so, you know, I can't speak to every experience, but I could do, you know, a bit of research and talk about at least my own and some of the things that I learned along the way. And I am so grateful for her. I pitched her this lofty thing of like, hey, can I do it? Like, I think I said to her, like, how long could a presentation be? I just kept on trying to keep pushing it. I was just like, how many people could you get in a room together to listen to it? And she saw the vision. She helped me like develop it and workshop it and got people together. So I presented it in the drama room at Lourdes. I presented it in the drama room. First, they got classes, just like all of the grade 9 classes. That was like, okay, you know, people, it's the end of the year, people are busy, maybe we can get the grade 9. So they got all the grade 9s together and I presented it for them and it went amazing. It was a lot of really hard work on my end and the payoff was incredible. I made the principal at the time cry. He's a lovely person. My parents came to it. What I wasn't expecting is so many students came up to me afterwards and said, "Hey, I'm trans, or I think that I'm queer. Here's my experience. Thank you so much for saying this." And I wasn't expecting that in the slightest. But it went so well that I was asked to do it again. But this time, any class of any grade, you know, the teacher could participate and bring the class in, and it went just as good that time. So that's, you know, what compelled me to do all of that and to get to that point. And I got a taste for it and continued after that point. I think I had a bit of an unusually positive experience because I think that it functioned as well as it possibly could have at the time. A lot of teachers were deeply uncomfortable. I knew that there were specific people who avoided coming to those presentations because doesn't this go against our faith? I know that there must have been a lot of parents of the kids who attended who made some angry calls to the school. That happens all the time. But it was deeply surprising to me that the majority of the response was just overwhelmingly positive, unexpectedly positive. And I think at that moment I was able to see that there are pillars that have been built up that disenfranchise 2SLGBTQ LGBTQ youths in Ontario Catholic schools. This is a part of the research that Yvonne and I are doing and the outreach we do. And a lot of that is specifically built on perhaps misconceptions about what the Bible says or people's prejudices being imposed onto their faith. But at the same time of seeing those pillars, I was also able to see that other direction, those other possibilities that it could go in. And it's part of what inspired me to continue pursuing that academically afterwards. I am very lucky that I never got bullied or that I never experienced that. I know that there were students before my time and after my time that did get bullied for that very, very same reason. But I think being as outspoken and as visible as I was, you know, if somebody were to be negative like that to my face, you know, it wouldn't be the kind of bullying that happens when nobody's looking.
Yeah.
Because everybody was looking. And that hypervisibility was, you know, there's that paradox of there's a safety in that, but also a hypervigilance that not everybody can handle. But I felt very honored to kind of like be in that position. I think the majority of the response that I got from the school community was positive. even the kids that I grew up with, they were like, "Oh, that's why you were the way that you were. This all makes sense." I was like, "Yeah, okay." Everybody knew but me. Everybody knew that me. This explains my weird. And I was really thankful to be embraced by my peers the way that I was, and I wish that more people were able to have that experience. After I did that presentation, the second one, Yvonne Runstedler, the fantastic teacher that helped me develop, she came to me and said, "That was amazing. We're taking this show on the road." And I was like, "Okay, I don't know what that means." And she said, "I didn't know what that meant either." But sometimes somebody says something just because it comes to them, and then it comes true a little bit later on. And she actually started a PhD in the topic, and I feel slightly, responsible, but also extremely proud in the topic of the experiences of transgender and gender diverse graduates of Ontario Catholic schools, their specific narratives and experiences and themes of what they got during high school. Incredible research. She and I have been doing a lot of co-presentations in beyond Wellington, beyond Guelph. We've been to various Catholic school boards around Ontario to do professional development presentations for teachers because they require a certain amount of equity-based education and programming for teachers to get everybody on board on the same page and to provide more information and things like that. And a few years ago, she developed her own business. It's called To Love Consulting. She didn't need to be as incredible to me and other students in her life as she has been. Trans people in general are kind of a scapegoat for a lot of people. We're undesirable in a certain way, or the little guys. And allies really do put themselves in the line of fire. And for something that she isn't, she's just been unbelievably incredible. And I am ever so grateful for her, her support, her work, her call to love and support students that she, over her long career, has seen struggle in deeply profound ways. And I think, part of her calling, as a Catholic, as a Christian, to love your neighbor, there's such a supreme love there. Everybody should be your neighbor. You shouldn't have any enemies, but the Christian tradition even calls you to love your enemies and people that you disagree with. There's this deep call to protect people. And I think that she has modeled that in such an extremely profound way.
Watching these two beautiful humans together, it's this even-handed, well-informed, hilarious, because they know each other really well, and so it's like you can riff, and Yvonne knows exactly where to pick up, and this comes from practice, obviously, but just the resonance these two have that comes from deep love for each other. Yvonne is willing to give up some of her privilege and also use the privilege that she has, the positions that she has really well in order to boost, people like James. And so I love the line that the two of you use about trust us, we are not in the business of canceling people. Mm-hmm. And then you see people relax, these teachers that are nervous about the Catholic police. Mm-hmm. Someone's going to come in and discipline me for trying to be a good human. But you see at least some of the room, the whole room is leaning forward. There's nobody on their phone. That's wild, right? You're professionals in professional development, and someone's always on their phone and nobody's on their phone. And people are leaning forward, and some people relax enough to really ask the honest question, even if they word it wrong, because these two lovely humans are not willing to cancel people who come in good faith. Mm-hmm. And somehow I'm being gradually onboarded onto this team, and it's just amazing.
Is your Bible consultant.
I'm a Bible nerd. I just am. I am a Protestant. I am a Bible nerd.
I say, Robbie, where's that part of the Bible that says this or that? He's just like, oh yeah, the exact paragraph. I'm just, whoa, okay, I'll get there one day. I'll get there one day maybe.
I think personal testimony is important, and that's why I invited you. I think both of you are important to me. I think both of your perspectives are valuable. I think I can learn personally a lot. It does not matter if you have the highest of degrees or you have no degrees. I can learn from you. Your perspective is valuable. You are a unique human being on this planet that has experienced things your own way, and I absolutely am here to love that. Like, I am here to cherish that, and I'm here to get a glimpse, and you allow me to get a glimpse of your life. And I really do appreciate that. So thank you for all the blessings of showering with me. So how active are you in the 2SLGBTQIA plus community? And what are some criticisms you have of the community?
Oh, Lord, tangent, Jesus, save us now. Okay.
There's multifacets to that, I think. We're definitely involved like academically, like this is specifically the focus of our academic work, queer theory, and all of its iterations. And it's not one big monolithic thing. You know, there's people and they disagree with each other within that, as scholars love to do. Another aspect is just friendship groups. You know, not all gay people know each other, but a lot of them do, especially when you live in a city. We live in Toronto, and there's a ton of people that live there. On the topic of pride, though, I think that is where a lot of my criticisms come in. I think that there's still a lot of intersectional work that needs to be done with pride. Specifically, quite a few years back, during the Pride Parade, there was a demonstration by the Black Lives Matter movement in Toronto by a group who...
they were the marshal of the parade that year.
They were the marshal of the parade that year. And they did this incredible, moving, and powerful demonstration. And because they held up the parade for 30 minutes, people got so mad. People in the gay community got so mad. They were like, you know, why does this matter? Like all of these things. And it was unbelievable for me to see that. The first Pride parade in Toronto, you know, the States has their own history, but in Toronto was in response to police violence in the Toronto bathhouse raids. There's a systemic injustice going on, and the next day people turned out and marched together, and that became the annual Pride Parade. And here is this group who's doing the exact same thing. These are people in our community who are experiencing this kind of violence. Please take us seriously. It was incredible. And you know, the criticism that I have is that aspect of the history has been sanitized a little bit. Corporate pride is a thing. You know, put a rainbow on something and they'll eat it up, and that's a criticism. But also just there was some responses that I've heard from people in the community about that disruption and that work that needs to be done that I've been very critical of.
Do you know the only people I heard complain after that incident, because I was in my classwork phase of my PhD, the only people I ever heard complain were white, middle-aged, queer people. Yeah. Some lesbian identified women too, but they were all of a certain sort of, the good-hearted liberals, you know, started to complain. And I think that's a criticism I have. I notice that when it's cisgender, white, mostly able-bodied men and women who are part of the queer umbrella, it's really easy to sort of say, almost as a cohort, because of course it's not a monolith, I'm not talking about everybody, but there's this statistically significant tendency to sort of say, I got mine. And I think the only reason I'm not in that position is because I have at least 2 intersections off center. The complaint I have is like, we really, especially in Toronto, and I'm going to extend it because I assume it's similar in Guelph. If you're in a primarily white context with whiteness as the mindset that, you know, white people are the baseline for good social functioning, and everybody else sort of needs to come up to standard or you get penalized somehow, that needs to really be dug into, because one of the things, speaking as a Christian theologian, after the protest, there was this whole thing too about uniformed police officers and military personnel cannot be dressed in uniform when they're marching in the parade. Like if you are defending the parade, right? If you're on duty, that's a different thing. But because of the history that the institutions of the military and the police force, especially in Toronto, are still repenting of, okay, mostly it's real, but goodness, if you're a Black trans woman in Toronto, you're still going to have issues with police, and like that's still a thing in Toronto. But I bumped into a pastor who was a military chaplain, and he was offended because my uniform, the fact that I'm part of the Canadian military, is a core part of my identity. And I am offended that your community is making me give that up. And then the conversation ended. The thing that I wanted to say was, my privileged, heterosexual, married, white brother, you are a Christian and you are a pastor. And your love of Jesus Christ is supposed to, if you're reading the book and listening to the rabbi, that identity supersedes anything else that human beings attach to you. And so the fact that you think being a military chaplain is more important than you being a pastor who cares for people's souls. So these are damaged people walking down the street, even, stereotype, but he's there. And the community says, we do not feel safe when uniformed people with a history of assaulting us are marching in the parade. So be yourself, but don't show those symbols, because we want to feel safe with you around. And he can't hear the pastoral cry in that. Please do not assault us further by making us feel unsafe. And he's offended that his identity as a military chaplain is compromised. And I'm like, brother, you are a pastor. You do not have the right to make the military, for crying out loud, more important than your care of souls. The people that are walking behind you and in front of you on the street.
For as small of a city as Guelph is, and it is, I mean, at least compared to where I'm living now, the community was pretty vibrant, all things considered. And this was incredibly important for me, growing into my own identity as a queer and trans person. Is I was able to find other youth my age. There was youth drop-ins that would happen, and I would meet other people in the community and make good friends and talk about that, and meeting at coffee shops and going to parties and having this friend group that, and peer dynamic that I just didn't really have in high school. I think that as far as criticisms go, it's not necessarily any knocks against the community, but it is hard for people to find resources in Guelph specifically. I'm not too sure exactly why that is. It might just be that there isn't as much available. But even people are like, where do I go to talk to doctors or mental health workers that'll help out? At least for me, my family doctor was really instrumental in helping along the medical side of it. And there are endocrinologists in Guelph, for example, that help with hormone things, which is incredible. But I think that there is still that kind of lack of, because we even get questions, to this day in workshops, is where do I go for Guelph? And I feel bad that I can't really, answer all those questions, but I'm sure that there are resources a few Google searches away, or, Toronto's not that far away, and it does have a lot more in the way of resources. I will say, for the experiences that I had in Guelph, they were very positive, a very great group of people that were doing a lot of very hard work in the community. And wherever they are now, I hope that they're doing really well.
When was the time you felt the most judged? And are there elements of that time you felt judged that continue with interactions now?
I feel a lot of judgment, especially in documents that have very recently come out from the Vatican as well, about just a deep misunderstanding about who I am, my identity. I'm sorry, I'm not going to destroy the world by my existence. I'm not defying God by expressing myself in the most safe and loving and fulfilling way, living my life with the most dignity I possibly can, is not going to blow up the world. And so I feel judged on that end just because I feel misunderstood. But I think that that's something that can change.
Whenever I hear that, and I totally get what you mean, like, I'm just Robbie. I'm just this situation with CP and everything, and I'm just living my life. But I've preached to queer Christians. I'm like, you know what? If queer people can destroy the world, we probably should. Because it's so well, or would have already. But the sense that my people have, evangelicals and Pentecostals, Protestants, they have this idea that if I exist, their entire structure of reality explodes. They don't even know how to talk about Jesus because Jesus could have been gay. But if Jesus is gay, he can't be the savior because it's a sin. Do you believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus? Do you actually think that he is not dead, that he got up and walked out of the tomb and is now with God? They always say yes. And then I say to them, when I get the chance, well then, my opinion about my own sexuality has nothing to do with God's love is going to win. If I happen to get my sexuality or my gender wrong, the Christian story is that love always wins in the end. But that's why I'm still a Christian. It's not necessarily because I don't feel judged, because even in the material that I'm doing in my thesis, it's like, the reason why we don't listen to people like you, Robbie, is because you have an evil spirit, or you are being manipulated by Satan, Jezebel, lust, capitalism, whatever it is, but these huge demonic flappy things that wrap themselves around what my people think is structural evil. And that's why I'm saying what I say. And so my choices and my will when I talk about being queer are so compromised that they don't have to listen because I'm not the one who's speaking. And so far, my people aren't quite there. But when they actually start to listen to testimony, like James said, 1/4 of Christians in the world identify as something that falls under the Pentecostal umbrella, which means we everywhere. You can't get away. But if that whole movement begins to tilt in a direction that says the Spirit is energizing the testimonies of queer people, that will be a huge game changer in the entire Christian tradition. It'll help you and the work that you're doing. And I imagine that if Catholicism, or even most Catholics, tend to,
the larger percentage of Christians in the world, the biggest subgroup is Catholicism.
right.
And so we're going for the big ones.
Between the two of us, we can pinch them and get most people lying down, right? Yeah.
What resources would you suggest to someone who would want to know more, who would like to have a broader understanding of what we talked about today?
Well, as for personal stuff, Robbie runs, a Medium blog
At rob.daywalker.
at rob.daywalker, and you do excellent work. My presence is a little bit more situational at this point, but I think that as far as like resources go, I would say genuinely dig into it, look into the depths of your tradition. If you're curious about something, look. You can play with all of these things. There's great resources online. As far as very practical things go, if you're curious about learning more about the 2SLGBTQIA plus community, EGAL Canada, which is EGALE, is a great resource for finding terms and definitions and other things along those lines.
Because I'm a bookworm, most of the things I can offer right now are names of books. But if you happen to listen and you fall into broadly Pentecostal traditions. You know, if you call yourself charismatic, or if you're from the Vineyard or any of these folks, Bethel Church, any of that spread of Christians, the two best books for you that I've ever read would be Ken Wilson, A Letter to My Congregation, and then the follow-up book that he wrote with Emily Swan called Solus Jesus. If you tend to be more evangelical Protestant without being Pentecostal, I would say James Brownson has a book called Bible, Gender, Sexuality. And then Matthew Vines has a book called God and the Gay Christian. Between those two books, you'll get a really good sense of what's going on. There's a Catholic resource that's in its 4th edition called The Church and the Homosexual. You can also read Father James Martin's Building a Bridge 2nd edition is really excellent. So those two for Catholics. My friend Giacomo runs a blog called Orthodoxy in Dialogue across many, many issues, but he himself is a gay man, an out gay man, and canonically inappropriately defrocked priest, deposed priest, but he has excellent Orthodox-based material on this conversation and across all kinds of other issues. And the other Orthodox scholar I know is a guy named Bryce E. Rich, and you can look him up. He's on academia.edu and some other places, but he actually came out recently with a really excellent book on Orthodox theology and how it can help think through the experience of trans Christians. The last thing I want to say, my friend Jamie, who lives in Winnipeg, is heading up an organization / website called the Rainbow Well, which has all kinds of resources, especially around just queerness and faith and that intersection, movies, books, like all kinds of things. And it just, actually the website went up last week. And so that's the rainbowwell.ca. And that's what I've got so far. So yeah, resources coming out the wazoo.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Robbie, for joining us for our first podcast episode. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and many more episodes to come. Check out our Instagram and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.
This sounds like a YouTube video exit.